I'd be happy to help with a fictional royal drama, but I can't help create a story that falsely portrays real people, such as members of the British royal family, as if fabricated events really happened. Instead, here's a fictional version that makes clear it's an imagined story. Before the story begins, a note appears on screen. This story is a work of fiction inspired by the traditions and symbolism of royal institutions. It does not depict real events or official actions. The palace had stood for centuries, watching generations come and go, keeping secrets that the world would never know. Yet on this cold autumn evening, something felt different. The ancient clock echoed through the quiet corridors, and every member of staff seemed to move with unusual caution. Somewhere behind one of the heavy oak doors rested a single crimson folder marked with an unfamiliar seal. Outside the palace gates, thousands of tourists laughed, took photographs, and admired the magnificent building, completely unaware that inside those walls, one family was about to face a decision unlike any in its history. But before we continue this fictional journey, if you enjoy emotional stories filled with mystery, family drama, and unforgettable lessons, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Every subscription helps us create more cinematic stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. No one knew who had delivered the folder. Security cameras showed only a black car arriving shortly after sunset. A courier dressed in plain clothes handed the package to a palace guard, signed no paperwork, and disappeared into the London traffic before anyone thought to ask questions. Inside the folder was a handwritten note. It contained only 9 words. Every family must eventually choose legacy over silence. There was no signature. No date. No explanation. Only those words. For Sir Edward Ashcombe, the palace's fictional keeper of the royal archives, the message stirred memories he had buried decades earlier. For 42 years he had protected letters, diaries, portraits, and forgotten records belonging to generations of the royal household. He believed every document carried a heartbeat of history. History was never meant to be erased. History was meant to be understood. As midnight approached, Sir Edward descended into the archive chambers beneath the palace. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into darkness. Leather-bound books. Ancient maps. Yellowed letters tied together with fading ribbons. Thousands upon thousands of stories waiting patiently to remind future generations where they came from. He unlocked the crimson folder. Inside lay another envelope. Its seal bore no royal crest. Instead, it displayed the image of an old oak tree. Beneath it were the words, "Roots survive because they remain connected." Sir Edward frowned. He had seen that symbol only once before. 40 years earlier. Back then he had been a young archivist learning from his mentor, Margaret Ellison. Margaret often repeated the same lesson. Empires rise and fall, she would say. Families argue. Names change. But truth deserves a home. At the time, Sir Edward barely understood. Tonight those words echoed louder than ever. Across the city, a young journalist named Emily Carter received an anonymous message. Tomorrow, history changes. Nothing more. Emily had spent years chasing sensational headlines. Most tips proved worthless. Yet something about this message felt different. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe, deep inside, everyone longs to uncover a story bigger than themselves. The next morning, palace staff noticed unusual activity. Meetings were called. Doors remained closed. Whispers replaced ordinary conversation. Every employee sensed tension, but no one knew its cause. Among them worked Thomas Bennet, a gardener who had quietly served the palace grounds for nearly 30 years. Thomas had watched countless royal ceremonies from a distance. He had seen celebrations. Funerals. Birthdays. Coronations. He believed flowers revealed emotions people tried to hide. When lilies bloomed early, someone was grieving. When roses flourished unexpectedly, hope had returned. That morning every rose in the eastern garden opened at once. Thomas smiled sadly. Something important is coming. Elsewhere inside the palace, Sir Edward finally opened the second envelope. Instead of official documents, he discovered dozens of handwritten letters. Some were over a century old. Others appeared surprisingly recent. Each letter shared one theme: forgiveness. Brothers writing to brothers. Parents apologizing to children. Friends separated by pride. Families reunited after decades apart. Sir Edward realized these were not political records. They were reminders. A collection assembled across generations to teach one lesson. No title. No signatures. Only human hearts speaking honestly. He understood immediately why someone had protected them in secret. Power fades. Love endures. As he continued reading, tears slowly formed in his eyes. He remembered his own younger brother. They had not spoken in 18 years. A simple disagreement over their father's estate had grown into permanent silence. Neither had apologized. Neither had forgiven. Both had waited. Sometimes waiting becomes its own prison. Sir Edward closed the final letter and whispered, "I've wasted enough time." Without another thought, he left the archives earlier than ever before. Across London, Emily continued searching for answers. Every source she contacted repeated the same phrase. No comment. No comment. No comment. The silence itself became the story. Yet she sensed the truth was not about politics. It was about people. About family. About choices. By sunset, the mysterious crimson folder returned to the archive shelf. Nothing had officially changed. No announcement had been made. No records erased. No headlines confirmed the rumors. Instead, something quieter had happened. One elderly archivist picked up a telephone. He dialed a number he hadn't called in almost 20 years. His brother answered. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally Sir Edward whispered, "I'm sorry." The other end remained silent. Then came an unexpected reply. "I've been waiting to hear those words." Sometimes the greatest victories never appear in newspapers. Sometimes history changes because two ordinary people decide to stop carrying yesterday into tomorrow. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, Thomas looked across the blooming garden as evening sunlight painted everything gold. He smiled. Not because kingdoms last forever, but because kindness always outlives pride. The greatest names in history are remembered not for the titles they held, but for the compassion they chose when no one was watching. And perhaps that is the truest legacy anyone can leave behind. Sir Edward stood frozen in the quiet hallway, the telephone still trembling in his hand. For nearly 20 years, he had imagined this conversation 1,000 different ways. In every version, one of them would hang up. One of them would refuse to forgive. One of them would cling to old wounds. Instead, neither brother spoke. Sometimes silence carries more emotion than words ever can. Finally, Edward's older brother, William, let out a slow breath. "I don't even remember what we were fighting about anymore," he admitted. Edward closed his eyes. Neither did he. All those years of birthdays missed. Christmas cards never sent. Family photographs with empty spaces where one brother should have stood beside the other. It had all begun with something so small that time had erased the reason, but not the pain. "I'd like to see you," Edward whispered. "So would I." The call ended with no promises beyond a simple meeting the following weekend, yet Edward felt lighter than he had in decades. As he walked through the palace corridors, he noticed something he had overlooked for years. The portraits lining the walls all told the same silent story. Generations came and went. Styles changed. Uniforms changed. Buildings expanded. But every face, whether smiling or stern, belonged to someone who had once loved, feared, celebrated, and regretted. History remembered their names. It rarely remembered their hearts. Meanwhile, across London, journalist Emily Carter found herself chasing a mystery that seemed to vanish every time she came close. Every official denied that anything unusual had happened. No missing records. No secret decree. No extraordinary meeting. Yet whispers continued spreading through social circles. Some insisted an announcement was coming. Others claimed hidden archives had been opened. Emily had built her reputation exposing rumors that turned out to be true. This time, however, something felt different. Late that evening, an elderly librarian contacted her anonymously. "I've watched your work," he said softly. "You keep looking for documents." Emily reached for her notebook. "Because documents reveal the truth." The old man chuckled. "Not always." "What do you mean?" "The greatest stories are the ones no archive can preserve." Before she could ask another question, the line went dead. The following morning, Palace gardener Thomas Bennet noticed a young boy standing quietly near the gates. The child couldn't have been older than 10. Instead of taking photographs like the tourists around him, he simply stared at the palace. Thomas approached gently. "Beautiful building, isn't it?" The boy nodded. "My grandfather always wanted to visit." "Where is he now?" The child looked down. "He passed away last month." Thomas's heart sank. "My mother brought me here because she said he believed every family deserves another chance before it's too late." The word struck Thomas like a bell echoing through an empty cathedral. Another chance. Those 3 words seemed to follow everyone lately. He reached into his gardening basket and handed the boy a freshly cut white rose. "Take this home." "What for?" "So every time you see it, remember not to wait too long to tell someone you love them." The boy smiled. It was a small smile. But sometimes the smallest smiles carry the greatest hope. That afternoon, Sir Edward returned to the underground archives. The mysterious crimson folder remained exactly where he had left it. He almost walked past it. Instead, curiosity won. Inside, he discovered one final envelope. Unlike the others, this one contained no letters. Only a single photograph. It showed a large oak tree standing alone in an open field. On the back, someone had written, "A tree survives storms because its roots grow together beneath the ground." Edward stared at the image for several minutes. Suddenly, he understood. The folder had never been about history. It had never been about records. It had never been about names. It was about what people choose to preserve. Documents preserve facts. Forgiveness preserves families. Emily's investigation reached its turning point that evening. She finally located the courier who had delivered the mysterious package. The elderly man smiled politely but refused every question. "Who sent the folder?" "I cannot say." "What was inside?" "I never looked." "Was it important?" He paused. "It changed one man's life." "Only one?" The courier shook his head. "Perhaps many." Emily frowned. "I don't understand." "You will." He walked away before she could stop him. Days later, Edward boarded a train to a quiet countryside village. Waiting on the platform was his brother. Both men had aged. Both carried the weight of years. For a long moment they simply stood there. No speeches. No dramatic music. No perfect words. Then William stepped forward. The brothers embraced. Nearby passengers barely noticed. To them, it was an ordinary reunion. To Edward, it felt like history itself had been rewritten. Not because old records disappeared, but because two living hearts refused to remain divided. Emily never published the sensational headline she had hoped to write. Instead, she wrote something unexpected. Her article was titled, "The Stories That Never Reached the Front Page." It spoke of forgiveness, second chances, the quiet courage required to admit mistakes. Many readers said it was her finest work. Not because it exposed a scandal, but because it reminded people of something they had forgotten. That every family carries invisible chapters. And every chapter can have a different ending if someone is brave enough to write it. As autumn gave way to winter, the palace gardens remained as beautiful as ever. Thomas planted a new oak sapling near the eastern path. Visitors walked past it without giving it much thought. Years later, few would remember who planted it. But generations would rest beneath its shade. Thomas smiled as he brushed soil from his hands. "That's the thing about kindness," he whispered. "You may never see how far it grows." The wind carried fallen leaves across the gardens, and somewhere high above, the palace bells rang once more. Not to announce the end of a family's story, but to remind anyone willing to listen that the strongest legacies are never built on titles, records, or names. They are built on love, forgiveness, and the courage to choose compassion before time runs out.